She's now bragging about the success of Snow White, which is a movie that's going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars, and mainly because of her.
Have you ever watched a decades-old classic and thought, how could anyone possibly ruin something so beloved? That's exactly the question swirling around Disney's latest live-action remake of Snow White. What should have been a glittering tribute to one of cinema's most influential fairy tales has erupted into one of the biggest controversies Disney's faced in years. At the epicenter of all this chaos is Rachel Zegler, the breakout star who was once hailed as a rising luminary, only to become a lightning rod for criticism. Now, as rumors about legal disputes and behind-the-scenes drama keep popping up, Disney finds itself grappling with a crisis it never expected. How did we get here, and what does this fiasco mean for the future of the House of Mouse? Let's dive in.
Says their mission is to entertain, not send messaging as Snow White sales complete. For
the original Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, released in 1937, wasn't just a successful film. It was a cornerstone for the entire Walt Disney empire. It put Disney on the map as a powerhouse in animation, captivating audiences with a simple but magical story about a princess, her dwarfs, and a treacherous queen. For generations, the story remained a touchstone of innocence and wonder. So when word spread that Disney was planning a live-action remake, complete with a modern twist, fans were intrigued. The studio had already found box office gold with previous remakes, but Snow White was the ultimate sacred jewel. Few doubted it would draw massive crowds. Then came the hype machine, the press events, and the official announcements. Rachel Zegler, known for her performance in West Side Story, was front and center, promising a fresh take for today's audiences. Critics and fans alike were excited to see a new layer brought to an old classic. And for a while, that optimism seemed to hold. But almost as soon as marketing kicked into gear, alarm bells started to ring. Zegler gave interviews that painted the original story as dated and weird, specifically calling out the romance with Prince Charming as creepy or off-putting. Those comments, while possibly well-intentioned, landed like a bucket of cold water on nostalgic fans. Suddenly, the studio's brilliant new star wasn't just promoting a film. She was challenging the very essence of what made Snow White such a beloved tale. Older audiences felt slighted. Traditional Disney fans questioned why the company would hire someone who appeared to belittle the story's core elements. Social media exploded. That alone might have been enough to stir controversy, but it was only the opening act. Behind the scenes, Disney executives had been debating how heavily to modernize a 1937 fairy tale. Some believed the old magic still worked and only needed subtle tweaks. Others argued that a major overhaul was necessary to keep the story relevant for younger generations. The result was a patchwork approach. Princess, check. Evil queen, check. Dwarfs? Sort of, but not exactly. Words like diverse, progressive, and empowering began to populate cast interviews, suggesting the remake was boldly stepping away from the original's formula. As fans soon discovered, that pivot was huge. Images leaked showing the dwarfs completely transformed or even replaced. Alleged plot details described a Snow White whose journey had little in common with the one from 1937. Zegler's repeated commentary about a new perspective ended up feeling like a final blow to those who cherished the classic's simplicity. By the time the first trailers hit, the public was bracing for chaos, and chaos is exactly what they got. Critics hammered the film for its radical changes. Enthusiasts, raised on the original movie's warmth and charm, felt betrayed. Meanwhile, Zegler doubled down, maintaining that this reinterpretation was a long-overdue update. Whether she was following her own convictions or parroting studio directives is now a point of fierce debate. Some rumors claim Disney encouraged the cast to publicly champion a new modern angle, only to panic when audiences pushed back. The actress was then left holding the bag, with outraged fans demanding accountability. The meltdown unfolded across social media, with each new soundbite from Zegler fanning the flames further. The negativity was so overwhelming that the official Disney marketing team allegedly downplayed her presence in subsequent promos, hoping to avoid more backlash. But it was too late. The controversy had spiraled out of control. While the public feud bubbled over, more behind-the-scenes drama was on the way. Insiders whisper about a series of heated meetings at Disney headquarters. One rumor suggests that as early as 6 months before release, executives saw test screening feedback and realized they might be staring down a colossal flop. By that point, the budget had ballooned to well over $200 million. The dwarfs had been reimagined in ways that divided fans, and the central plot had become a minefield of modern references that left older viewers rolling their eyes. And yet, the team pressed on, banking on the Disney brand to guarantee a box office return. After all, in the past, even the lesser-loved remakes had managed to draw decent numbers. It wasn't just about changes to the story, though. Political tensions soon entered the frame. Rachel Zegler posted her support for certain causes on social media, including her Free Palestine remark, which set off a new round of furious debates. Whether one agrees with her stance or not, the fact that she interwove that statement with a promotional tweet for the movie raised eyebrows. Some corners of the internet applauded her advocacy. Others condemned it, saying it was inappropriate to merge a serious geopolitical issue with the family movie's marketing. To make matters even more tangled, her co-star Gal Gadot openly supported the opposing side, igniting a bizarre scenario where the film's two lead actresses stood on opposite ends of a heated conflict. Naturally, the controversy overshadowed nearly everything else about the film. Amid the turmoil, Mark Platt, the producer of the film, seemed to vanish from the spotlight, until his son Jonah Platt emerged with scathing remarks about Rachel Zegler's public behavior. Jonah essentially blamed her for sabotaging the project and tarnishing the Snow White legacy with a barrage of misguided statements. The press quickly picked up on this, feeding the narrative that the star was single-handedly driving the movie into the ground. And thus, the meltdown advanced into uncharted territory, an actress publicly at odds with the film's producer's family, each side believing the other was at fault. It soon became impossible to tell where personal convictions ended and studio obligations began. Word began circulating that Disney was exploring legal actions against Zegler for violating promotional guidelines or damaging the brand. A scheduled face-to-face meeting was rumored to be happening between her, Disney's top lawyers, and possibly even Bob Iger himself. The idea that one of Disney's golden hires could be dragged into a legal battle seemed almost unthinkable a year ago. But with the hemorrhaging budget and a box office prognosis that looked bleaker by the day, the studio felt cornered. Whether it was a genuine attempt to salvage the project or a desperate bid to protect Disney's image, the legal angles signaled that things had taken a dire turn. Within all this tension, it's important to remember, no single person is ever entirely to blame for a theatrical catastrophe. While Zegler's public statements undeniably fueled the fire, insiders say the creative direction was fractured from the start. Some claim Disney tried to please everyone, pushing for progressive changes while also marketing the film to families nostalgic for the original. That tug-of-war can lead to a disjointed end product, which test audiences apparently felt. The dwarfs' beloved sidekicks in the classic story received such a sweeping overhaul that many critics said the film scarcely resembled Snow White at all. Instead of focusing on charm and heartfelt adventure, the remake risked dissolving into a patchwork of modern references and serious, real-world commentary. Simultaneously, there was internal frustration about the marketing pivot. Early trailers promised a modern princess who wouldn't wait around to be saved. On paper, that sounded fine, especially to younger audiences who grew up wanting their favorite fairy tale characters to be more outspoken and independent. But combining that message with the condemnation of the original films, Weird Romance came off like a direct insult to the millions who revere the 1937 version. Worse still, some cast members took it further by calling the prince a stalker, or saying the original storyline was borderline inappropriate by today's standards. For the casual Disney fan, these comments felt like betrayal. If the people making the new film seem to have little respect for the old one, why should fans pay to see it? But the controversies didn't stop with creative disagreements. A swirl of corporate intrigue also took hold. Multiple insiders insist that a faction within Disney wanted the film's tone to remain closer to the classic. They reportedly argued that tampering too much with Snow White's DNA would risk alienating core audiences. However, a competing faction saw an opportunity for bold reimagination, insisting that times have changed and that a fresh spin was needed to keep the brand evolving. In the end, neither side fully won. Instead, the final cut tried to straddle both camps and ended up pleasing no one. Layer the political and social commentary on top of that confusion, and you have a perfect recipe for a fiasco. As the release date approached, the red flags grew impossible to ignore. Test screenings got lukewarm responses at best. Online chatter was relentlessly negative. Some fans even threatened boycotts, calling the reimagining disrespectful. Others had grown apathetic, complaining that Disney's parade of remakes had lost all spark and creativity. By the time official box office projections came in, they were dire. Estimates suggested that Snow White would fail to recoup its sky-high budget, which included not just production costs, but also extensive marketing and promotional expenses. The possibility of a major bomb hovered in the air, terrifying Disney shareholders already rattled by other underperforming ventures. Then came the big twist: rumors of an emergency meeting that Rachel Zegler was summoned to attend. While details remain sketchy, the gist is that Disney's legal department wanted to question whether she'd violated any contractual obligations by publicly ridiculing elements of the film or posting politically charged content under the Snow White banner. Some speculated that the studio considered seeking damages for brand harm, a move almost unheard of with high-profile stars. Of course, Zegler wasn't about to face that alone. She showed up with her own legal counsel, setting the stage for a high-stakes standoff. To the public, the mere existence of this confrontation spoke volumes. It suggested that Disney was prepared to hold its talent accountable in a way seldom seen before. Historically, studios and stars have locked horns, but these disputes usually remain hidden behind non-disclosure agreements and carefully worded press releases. The idea of such conflicts spilling into public view underscored just how desperate the situation had become. Observers wondered if the star felt blindsided, that maybe her so-called progressive statements were initially endorsed by the marketing team, only for the studio to make her the scapegoat when backlash erupted. Regardless of who's right, the spectacle was unprecedented, adding another layer of drama to an already tumultuous saga. Meanwhile, Disney shareholders began voicing frustration at board meetings, worried that the brand's very identity was being threatened. Snow White is not just any franchise. It's the bedrock on which Walt Disney built his empire. That legacy holds massive emotional weight. If the remake stands as a prime example of how misguided updates can backfire, the repercussions might echo through future live-action projects. Some investors demanded that Disney return to faithful retellings, fearing that overzealous attempts at modernization risk destroying the multi-generational loyalty that has defined Disney for decades. As if to confirm those fears, critics and moviegoers ended up panning the new film. Box office numbers reportedly sank faster than expected. The final tally was bleak. This wasn't just a slight underperformance, it was a full-scale collapse. Headlines declared Snow White the next big Disney bomb, and fans wondered out loud. How did the studio that brought us Beauty and the Beast and The Little Mermaid let their original princess crash and burn so spectacularly? The negativity overshadowed every element of the production. Even technical feats like lavish set designs, advanced special effects, and elaborate costumes were lost in the shuffle. Blogs, YouTube channels, and social media posts all harped on the same story. Rachel Zegler's ill-considered remarks, the dwarf's fiasco, and the baffling decision to call the classic creepy. Nothing else mattered. Gal Gadot, who portrayed the evil queen, wasn't spared either. While her statements were less combative, she faced scrutiny for what some perceived as dodging tough questions about the film's controversies. Fans demanded to know her stance, while the press hounded her for a response, especially when Zegler's political commentary took center stage. Yet Gadot mostly stayed quiet, possibly advised by her own team to keep her head down. Even so, rumors flew that Disney was also unhappy with Gadot for not doing more to quell the uproar or stand in solidarity with the new approach. Some insiders suggested that her contract included clauses about brand representation, meaning she wasn't entirely off the hook, either. Within the swirl of accusations, another theory emerged. Maybe the entire meltdown was orchestrated or encouraged by factions within Disney who wanted to sabotage the progressive approach. Could certain higher-ups have steered Zegler and the rest of the cast into making polarizing statements, only to pivot later and blame them for the movie's crash? Such speculation might sound far-fetched, but Hollywood has seen stranger behind-the-scenes power plays. Multiple executives hold differing visions for how the Disney brand should evolve, and it's not inconceivable that political or personal agendas slip into these big decisions. For Rachel Zegler herself, the risk goes beyond just one failed role. If she's viewed as difficult or disloyal, other studios might shy away from casting her in high-profile parts. Though she earned acclaim in West Side Story, the fiasco with Snow White could tarnish her mainstream viability, unless she manages to spin this narrative in her favor. A well-executed PR campaign might shift blame onto Disney. If documents prove she was instructed to say certain controversial things, she could emerge as a sympathetic figure who simply followed the corporate script. That's especially likely in an era where public sentiment often rallies behind individuals over big conglomerates. Legal experts note that contract disputes between studios and stars typically hinge on what the promotional obligations were, and whether any disparagement clauses were triggered. It's common for big-budget films to have language stating that actors must uphold the film's reputation, but the line between honest critique and outright disparagement can be fuzzy, especially if the studio itself asked cast members to highlight what they considered to be outdated elements of the original story. If Disney's own internal memos encouraged a modern spin that included criticizing the 1937 film, then turning around and penalizing Zegler for those very statements would look hypocritical at best. Even if the studio and the star settle behind closed doors, the damage to Disney's image is done. Audiences have watched one of the most cherished stories in animation history become a cautionary tale about overhauling tradition without a clear vision. Shareholders, having seen once reliable box office magic evaporate, are pressing for answers about how a supposedly sure-thing project could go so catastrophically wrong. The fiasco has forced Disney to reevaluate its entire strategy on live-action remakes. The days of automatically greenlighting updated versions of classic films with minimal concern about fan reception might be over. There's a growing consensus that the studio should re-examine what made those original animations so special in the first place, and treat them with more respect. Fans, meanwhile, are left grappling with mixed emotions. Some still appreciate the attempt to modernize a princess who, in the 1937 film, spent a fair chunk of her time cleaning up after 7 dwarfs and waiting for a prince. Others argue that there's a better way to balance modernization and respect for classic elements, citing recent remakes like Aladdin or Cinderella, which introduce new ideas without completely overhauling the core story. In the midst of it all, Snow White has become the poster child for how not to handle a legacy project. The fiasco has overshadowed discussions about everything else going on at Disney, whether it's expansions in streaming, theme park controversies, or upcoming releases. Looking ahead, the question is, can Disney salvage anything from this wreckage? Maybe the film ends up as a cautionary footnote, prompting future producers and directors to tread carefully when reimagining beloved tales. Perhaps the star and the studio part ways, quietly settling their differences and moving on. There's a chance that, in time, some fans may soften their stance and find redeeming qualities in the remake, though early reports suggest that's an uphill battle. Or maybe, just maybe, the entire ordeal prompts Disney to slow down, reevaluate its relationship with classic IP, and craft future projects with more nuance and unity of vision. No matter what happens next, one thing is clear. This Snow White saga is far from a simple fable of good triumphing over evil. It's a clash of old versus new, tradition versus reinvention, artistry versus corporate interests, and a stark reminder that in Hollywood, nothing is guaranteed. Even if you have a beloved property, a talented cast, and a colossal budget, the final product can fail if the creative direction and public messaging aren't handled with care. Once trust is broken, fans can be ruthless, and the brand can suffer for years to come. For decades, Disney was the gold standard, producing movies that became childhood cornerstones around the globe. Maybe that made the studio complacent, assuming that any major re-release or remake would automatically be showered with love. But times are changing, and audiences are more vocal than ever. Social media can quickly turn a small spark of controversy into a roaring inferno. Rachel Zegler's remarks, whether misguided, studio-driven, or personal convictions, lit the match. The rest was an explosion waiting to happen. From political tweets that blended with promo spots, to contradictory statements by other cast members, to the uneasy truths revealed by test screenings. Each new development piled onto the previous one until the entire production bowed under the weight of its own upheaval. So where does that leave us? Possibly at a turning point. If Disney wants to maintain its status as a cultural juggernaut, it can't afford too many more fiascos like Snow White. Audiences, especially longtime fans, are watching carefully to see how the studio recovers and whether it learns from these mistakes. As for Rachel Zegler, she faces an uphill climb to restore her image among fans who feel she disrespected the role and the legacy. Yet, Hollywood loves a comeback, and her talent is undeniable. She may very well land another defining role that erases the memory of this debacle, if she navigates the coming months with tact and clarity. In the end, Snow White was supposed to be a magical return to Disney's earliest blockbuster. Instead, it became a cautionary tale of how quickly things can unravel if the messaging, both in the movie and around it, alienates the very people who grew up loving the story. Disney tried to push forward with a new worldview, but bungled the communication and ended up in a full-blown crisis. Now they're dealing with possible lawsuits, angry shareholders, skeptical fans, and a fractured cast. Whether the brand can patch itself together remains to be seen. If nothing else, this debacle has taught the entertainment world one key lesson. When you play with the roots of an iconic classic, you'd better be prepared for the consequences. Because sometimes the real villain in a fairy tale isn't the evil queen, it's the peril of forgetting what made the story timeless in the first place.